The conference was fascinating. There were a few takeaways I had. The first is that AI is advancing and getting more powerful and practical. There was a company, for example, that was an AI education company where they monitor your eye movements and facial movements to see if you get bored during the lesson, and then if you are bored, they like switch tacks or do something that reactivates you.
I should get one of those for our conversations on this podcast.
What are you saying, bro?
When you get bored with whoever the
when I get boring, or vice versa. It's like, I don't need Zach, I need AI Zach.
I need AI Zach.
You'll be like, hey, I see your eyes.
Step out of it. Holy cow.
So AI is...
God, can you imagine that?
Yeah.
There's an art to sleeping when your teacher's not looking when you're in middle school, high school, right? Put your head down.
Yeah, apparently AI can see through that shit.
Jeez, that sucks.
This week on the podcast, we're going to talk about Build Back Better. Is it going to pass? What does it mean if it doesn't pass? We're also going to talk about this incredible AI conference I attended last week, what the main takeaways were. And then we thought we'd end on some feel-good content recommendations for the holidays. Just some holiday cheer, really. This week on Forward, Zach and I look into each other's eyes because there's a new recording studio that has us facing each other as opposed to side by side.
Longingly.
Zach, I never noticed how blue your eyes were.
I never noticed
until just now.
How close these chairs were together.
Whoever set the studio up.
Wow. If you're watching on YouTube, we look a lot cooler.
For love.
Call it an upgrade.
Yes. So yes, thank you to the team that put this together. I think the studio looks great.
Adam and James, superstars in Texas.
Look at this, investing in Forward. All sorts of exciting stuff on the horizon. That's really no lie. There's a lot of exciting stuff.
We got stuff
on the horizon. The news is not that encouraging on other fronts, starting with good old Build Back Better. So I have to say, when I talked to Zach about this a little while ago, as in earlier today, I was like, hey, we're going to talk about Build Back Better. And Zach's like, you mean that thing's not in the bag? It's not passing?
It's not in the bag.
It is not in the bag. It is not in the bag. So
wait, can you remind everybody, in case they don't follow politics as much as you do, what's Build Back Better supposed to be?
Build Back Better has been nicknamed the Social Infrastructure Plan. It went from $3.5 trillion to $1.7 trillion. It passed the House, and now it's in the Senate, which means it's really in the offices of Joe Manchin, because apparently the Senate is one person now. So right now, the vast majority of Democrats are on board with some version of the House bill.
Yeah.
But it truly is that Joe Manchin is looking it over and having long conversations with Joe Biden about what he will and won't sign off on. Mm-hmm. The Senate has a lot of business to attend to, and I will suggest to everyone that most people believe that some version of this bill will pass. The question is when. And if it doesn't pass before the holidays, then the child tax credit payment of $300 per child that's been helping tens of millions of Americans over the last number of months will be missed in January, which I'm going to suggest is going to be kind of a big deal, because if you've been getting monthly payments of a certain amount for the better part of a year now, and then they don't happen in January, I think it's going to be something that a lot of people notice. Literally, like, millions of Americans are going to look up and be like, wait a minute, what? Like that? I thought I was getting that money. And then they're not going to get it. So the deadline internally that was put out by the agency that's in charge of administering the child tax credit payments was that if this bill does not pass by December 28, then they're going to miss that payment.
So isn't the cardinal sin of politics is usually, and then why conservatives don't like entitlement programs, but it's when you give people something and then take it away. So you don't usually like to do that, right? So this probably doesn't go well, at least politically. I also am a little pissed because of all the entitlements, I like this one because it's direct cash.
Yep.
You know, there's not a lot of bureaucracy that can get in the way of that.
Everyone agrees that the child tax credit is the biggest public policy achievement victory of the last number of years. It's lifted millions of people out of poverty, millions of kids out of poverty.
Yeah.
It's widely popular. One of the problems right now for the Democrats in particular is that most recipients of the child tax credit don't understand what it is and don't understand that the Democrats are behind it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I have tried to say is that Democrats are messing up by not pounding their chests every month when the payment goes out.
Right.
Like the 15th of every month, millions of checks go out to families around the country that just shows up in their accounts in most cases. Joe Biden every month should be having an event in the White House lawn saying, hey, the child tax credit, alleviating poverty, you know you love it. And every Democratic official, every member of Congress should be doing the same thing. There should be unison. On the 15th of every month, families around the country are rejoicing because of this massive legislative accomplishment.
You know what they are crowing about, which is, in my opinion, the wrong move? They're crowing about jobs created in his first 12 months or so as president, which I think is kind of a ridiculous argument because we know that the economy went from closed to open. So no one's like...
And we're still down.
Right, and it's still not
4
great.
million jobs last I checked.
And then slight gas price reduction when we're already super high. I think Ben Shapiro tweeted something out where it was like, this is a perfect... But I follow him on Twitter, but I'm not, Ben... Don't agree with everything Ben says. Apparently we have to clarify that nowadays. But... He's like, this is a perfect Democrats graph where they've stretched out the x-axis and took credit for a small decrease in slope.
The price has gone down in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, a little bit. But that I agree with you. It's like the ship is. I feel like there's a question for you that they're doing things. I feel like they're doing things right, but there's so many other things wrong that they're not getting. They can't get any credit for the right stuff they're doing that in many ways is truly awesome because there's so many other things they're trying to fix them, let's call it a sinking ship or a burning building. Do you agree with that, or is it straight up just not good marketing? Or maybe it's both.
They should be taking more credit for their actual accomplishment, and it should be crystal clear to the American people who delivered these child tax credit payments. And also, and this is the tough part for Democrats, is who are you going to blame if they miss this December 28th deadline? It's hard to blame the Republicans on that one because it's legitimate. It's just like the Democrats trying to figure out how to get this thing renewed. My sense of things is that it's going to be difficult for Democrats to complete this bill by year end. The odds of the country missing one of these payments in January seem substantial.
Okay, real talk. How many of you listening to this actually enjoy brushing your teeth? I frankly can't stand it. It's more of a chore, or it was until I got a Quip electric toothbrush. And I want to tell you about them. And I'm not speaking for me. My brother has been a champion of this forever before they were a sponsor on our podcast. Andrew's been a champion of this before they were a sponsor of our podcast. I'm new to the game, and I'm now a huge fan. The Quip electric toothbrush is loved by over 7 million mouths, as they say. It's basically got it's an electric toothbrush, but it's got timed sonic vibration with 30-second pulses to guide what the dentist actually recommends during a 2-minute mouth clean. It's lightweight. It looks freaking cool for adults, for kids. You got cool colors. It's got a travel cover, so it's not a lot of mess. I used to use one of those clunky electric toothbrushes, and they were awful to travel with. This fits perfectly, and it's got this kind of slick metal hue to it. It's very, very cool. And plus, you can use their app and track your brushing and get amazing rewards like free refills and stuff if you're doing it well. It's pretty high-end, sleek tech, awesome toothbrush. And it's got everything you need for a complete mouth care routine, right? So you can get their anti-cavity toothpaste, which I like, and they give you floss, which I'm not great at, but they give me some, which is awesome. In addition to this, it delivers this to your door every 3 months for $5. So shipping is free. You can save money and skip the hustle and bustle of in-store shopping or forgetting that you need a new toothbrush or need a new toothpaste. It all comes to your door, and it starts at just $25. So you won't be paying through the teeth, for better oral health. So here's the deal. Once you go to getquip.com/yang right now, you'll get your first refill free. So that's your first refill free at getquip.com/yang. That's GETQUIP.com/yang. Quip,
The Good Habits Company. Check it out. You will not regret it.
So what's the holdup? Like, what is it just Joe Manchin?
It's just Joe Manchin.
And has he gone public with why what's hanging him up, or he's just loves this little spotlight moment?
He's concerned, I think, is that and the economic data, there were 2 data points that came out that were not positive. Number 1 was inflation, very high, which everyone expected. And number 2 is that this $1.7 trillion bill will grow the deficit by $3 trillion over 10 years is what the budget office projects.
Right.
And the Democrats are saying, no, that's not real. Some of these programs disappear. Like that $3 trillion's not what you should be concerned about. But Joe Manchin's been very, very public saying, I'm very concerned about the deficit. I'm very concerned about inflation. And he thinks that West Virginia voters are concerned about the same things and will not be excited about this bill passing. So he is the holdup. Now, there are a lot of people in West Virginia, frankly, that are going to be receiving these child tax credit payments. I mean, like it's extraordinarily popular there, too.
Right.
So the question is, when does Joe Manchin decide to sign off on what?
So we talked a little bit about inflation a couple weeks ago, and I asked you, what do you think the root cause is? And you said a lot of it is supply chain. There's less bikes being made, and so people, dollars not the prices of goods are going up because of supply chain. But I do think there's bigger macro trends as well here, and stimulus checks are probably not helping, but not the root cause. Like,
I don't think stimulus checks are causing the problem.
I don't think so either. But what are your thoughts on the inflation situation right now? I guess we'll start.
I think the economy's gotten a lot of energy pumped into it because of some of the measures the Fed's taken, and then you have a constraint on supply, and then these things are intertwined. I mean, just look at gas. Are gas prices being high because people have more money in their pockets? I would argue no. I would argue that it's because there are a bunch of freighters off the coast of California that can't get to port, and that also influences toys. It influences a lot of other things. I think that is the proximate cause. But it's also true that we're pumping a lot of liquidity into the system, and that some of that is making the economy run hot.
Do you think it's an irresponsible decision to pass a $3 trillion, something that increases the deficit by X trillion dollars, $3 trillion or so? Is it irresponsible to pass a bill like that when you're seeing record inflation? Or what's the workaround, or what's the solution here in your eyes?
To me, it's about what you're using the money for and who it's going to. So if you have this economic situation, I do not mind investing in airports, bridges, and roads, because guess what? You should have done that 10, 20 years ago. And who the heck wants to be going over a bridge where you're concerned it's going to collapse, or it actually does collapse. Yeah. So it's a fine use of money. I think getting kids out of poverty is a fine use of money. I think are there things that you could look at this bill and be like, I'm not so sure about that one. Of course, especially in a bill this size. So there are certain parts of this bill that I am super excited about, like the child tax credit.
Right.
And I do think that Democrats are struggling to make a really affirmative case for themselves. And you could also say, look, is it the Democrats' fault that Joe Manchin is the 50th vote and he is not on board with this stuff? It's hard to blame all Democrats.
Yeah, he's not really a Democrat, right?
And the Democrats, I think, recognize that they're lucky to have Joe Manchin.
It's better than the alternative, right?
Well, because what are the odds of there being a Democratic senator from West Virginia?
Not high.
Yeah, really low. So then you have this.
You take it.
Yeah, you take it, and then so
that, what that is? It's a mismanaged expectation there, because it was the narrative was Joe had a blue house and a blue Senate. And
technically true,
and he actually doesn't. He has a blue house and almost he has like a purple Senate. He's a, what do you call it? An almost blue, baby blue Senate. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. And Joe Manchin has openly flirted with the idea of saying, look, if you guys don't want me in your party, I'll leave. And the Democrats are like, no. Let's not. Because the D label
probably didn't help him there.
Yeah, West Virginia is not exactly buoying Joe. I think West Virginia, generally speaking, is like a plus 18 Republican state, something like that.
I do worry about. I've always been hesitant on big government spending programs in general because the problems I've always seen is that they're very tough to get rid of, like I was saying earlier, and it's not now that I'm worried about. It's not the implementation. That's usually pretty good. Like someone like smartly and intelligently designs a system, but it's 20 years from now, 30 years from now, where you now have creatures in the system and bloat and excess spending and things that don't work or changing with the times. I mean, you name it, right? Where you then end up kind of a system now where you can literally say, if we just gave people cash, it would be 50 times cheaper, right? And you end up with that stuff, and because the government's not great at a lot of things.
So the child tax credit to me is a massive victory. I hope that Joe Manchin decides to renew this before year end and that they don't miss a payment. But if they do miss a payment, I am curious as to what the level of popular reaction will be, because this is something that everyone's going to notice. Like if you're in one of these, I think I saw that the numbers like 62 million Americans are in households that get these payments. So you'll have tens of millions of Americans being like, "Hey, what happened to that thing?" And it may give rise to the conversation that Democrats should be having already. Is like what is that payment? Like how did it get there? Who's behind it? Because again, I will affirm that Democrats have done a lousy job of explaining and taking credit for something that they should be crowing about every single month.
Do you think it's because it's a catch-all bill? In the sense that when Obamacare was passed, or even Trump's stuff, Trump was lower taxes and, frankly, I guess repealing some things. He wanted to fight against Obamacare, but it was a little more laser focused, if possible. Here you have a lot in that bucket.
Well, if you ask Democrats what they're excited about in the Build Back Better bill, they're going to say all these other things that, frankly, are less direct than the child tax credit.
That's of course.
Yeah. So if you run around saying, "Hey, guess what? We're reducing the cost of daycare," now. Am I for that? I am for that.
Yeah.
Daycare is too expensive. But, is that going to apply to like every family? No. Are there a lot of families that'll hear that and be like, "There's nothing to do with me." You know what I mean? Like you should be trying to take credit for the things that. And so this is actually one of the main problems of the Democratic Party right now is that they're arguing for things that they think you should care about, and then when there's something you do care about, they'll be like, "Oh, I'm not going to pay attention to that because I'm going to tell you what you should care about," or like, "Here's what I care about you caring about," or something like those slides. Now, again, there are a lot of things in this bill that I very much love, but it seems like they have dropped the ball generally on the child tax credit messaging, and we're going to see if this thing passes by year end. The thing that most people are going to notice if it does not pass by December 28th is going to be this missing payment in January. And then the pressure will be on, like, do they pass it in January? Does the payment happen in February?
Rolling, right? They have an expectation management problem, and I think that cat's out of the bag now. They already were expected to do something, and we haven't. Well, you got the infrastructure bill, but now we've...
Most people thought that Build Back Better was on its way to passage.
Yeah.
Yes.
And here we are. So we will keep you posted, as always, a couple days after, whenever the Thursday after it happens, you will know first here.
It's the holiday season, which means it's a great time for a lot of people, but you know what? Honestly, it's also a really depressing time for a lot of people. I don't know, maybe our lives aren't like the movies. Maybe we're thinking about people that aren't with us. But in any case, right now is a great time to take charge of your mental health, to get the professional help that a lot of us know that we've kind of needed for a little while. Don't put this on your friends and family. They have no idea what they're talking about some of the times. Instead, you should use our sponsor, BetterHelp.com, and their professional therapists who are trained and available to you when you need them. It's like mental health on call. It's pretty amazing. This is one way that we can use the services of today to actually improve our lives. And if you visit our sponsor at betterhelp.com/yang, you'll get 10% off your first month. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/yang. /yang. Happy holidays. Let's make them happy for real.
We were traveling this week and we were renting a car, and the people sitting at the car desk at the Hertz or where we budgeted, wherever we were, they looked, I felt for them. They looked bored. They did not look fulfilled in their job. They were lovely to us for sure. But it hit me that job's probably going to get automated sooner rather than later, given that they didn't look like they were using every second of their time. And all the incentives are going that way. And we haven't talked about automation in a while. So you just went to a conference on this. So tell us anything cool you saw, and then we'll dive in a little deeper.
The conference was fascinating. There were a few takeaways I had. The first is that AI is advancing and getting more powerful and practical. There was a company, for example, that was an AI education company where they monitor your eye movements and facial movements to see if you get bored during the lesson, and then if you are bored, they switch tacks or do something that reactivates you.
I should get one of those for our conversations on this podcast.
What are you saying, bro?
When you get bored with whoever
when I get boring, or vice versa. It's like, I don't need Zach, I need AI Zach.
I need AI Zach.
He'll be like, hey, I see your eyes.
Step out of it. Holy cow!
So AI
God, can you imagine that?
Yeah,
there's an art to sleeping when your teacher's not looking when you're in middle school, high school, right? Put your head down.
Yeah, apparently AI can see through that shit.
Jeez, that sucks.
And it's meant to help you engage more. And
theoretically,
teach you better,
right?
But it's getting better and stronger and more practical. So that's one takeaway. Another takeaway I had was that its job replacement capacity is growing, and that's hand in hand with some of the things you're describing in the labor market. So we're in the midst of a fairly nasty cycle, which is you look up and say, hey, you're short workers. Well, then let's automate the jobs that are there. And then you need fewer workers, and you have fewer workers. I mean, right now we're still down. Last I checked, about 4 million jobs since pre-COVID. And the labor force participation rate in the United States right now is maybe 61.9%. Something really low. If you look at the international comparables, I think we're tied with Ukraine or something along those lines. If you look at other industrialized countries that you think of as modern economies and peers, they're almost uniformly higher than us.
Are they doing something better than we are in this, or we just have?
They are. They are.
Are they avoiding automation? Like what? That's kind of where I was going. Like.
So what's happened here in the U.S. over the last number of years is you had our labor force get driven up and up by women showing up in the workforce. And then after that advance, then it's been going down, down, down for the last number of years and years and years. A lot of the people that are getting pushed out of the workforce are men, are non-college educated men. And by the way, that's driving a lot of political and social phenomena, ills. I mean, it's not positive in most any of these communities. And so then you have automation also that now is speeding up. You have people who are dropping out of the workforce right now for a variety of reasons. Some of it's health related, some of it is meaning of life related. I mean, this is a very, very tough time. And so a lot of people are taking a step back. And if you have the capacity to take a step back even for a month or two, particularly, by the way, if you have a job that you're pretty confident you can get an equivalent job at the drop of a hat. You know what I mean? Like if I'm in like
I can always go back to X.
Yeah, like let's say I'm a server at a restaurant or I'm a retail clerk. Am I pretty confident I can just show up to another store or restaurant and get a job like that?
Right now? Yes.
Yeah, of course. There are help wanted signs everywhere. So it's like, well, if I have the capacity to take 4 weeks off or 6 weeks off or do something, why don't I do that? Because I know I can just swap back into that job. Other countries have done a better job of trying to find fits between workers and employers. There are some countries that have very, very generous bridge and subsidy programs where they say, look, you're losing your job because, for example, of automation, and this does happen in some European countries, like what, we're automating your job away? We're going to be moving heaven and earth for a while to like find you a new job. We're going to subsidize this. We're going to do that. We're going to like pay for, and they actually execute.
Better than we do.
Yeah, better than we do. Like here, a politician goes to a mic and says, we're going to do this, and then just everyone forgets about it, and then you go back and nothing happened. But some of these countries actually are taking workers and leading them by the hand to like employers and being like, hey, let's try and make this thing work.
Interesting.
So there's some trends that are speeding up in the U.S. and AI is part of this. I talked to one company that has a labor replacing robot that costs approximately $55,000 and replaces one worker, working all the time. So
It never stops.
yeah, so if you do the math on that, like that robot's going to pay for itself within 1 year,
Yeah.
maybe less.
Probably less because they're not working weekends and nights, right?
Yeah, and so I think that robot's going to sell a lot of units, and then when you look up and say, hey, where the jobs go? I mean, people are going to go like, well, no one wanted this job, so we got this robot,
Yep.
and here it is. So that was the second big takeaway I had. The third was I got reminded of some of the hazards around AI leapfrogging humanity and being unfettered in its impact and decision making. There was this Russian mathematician. You could tell he was fucking brilliant. It's one of those things. But
When they talk math in an accent, I usually just think you're smarter than you actually are. That's because I'm dumb.
This guy was also a professor in a major university and the rest of it. So he was talking about there were some smart people at this conference, like really, really high end.
Yeah, so the types of conferences Andrew's getting invited to on AI are pretty, for what it's worth, they're pretty cool, man. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, you better be. Right? You're one of the bigger thought leaders on the topic. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, and it's thank you for saying so. It's also the case that I turn down a lot of freaking.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. You get a lot of them, so when you decide to go,
yeah, it's a good one because most of them I'm just like, hey, I can't.
And no offense if you've invited us to a conference. We get a lot. It's not personal.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little personal, but okay, done.
So this mathematician said something that stuck with me, even though I kind of knew this stuff already. He was like, hey, if you have an AI that, let's say, is like a little smarter than a human, maybe it's genius level. Maybe you have like a human genius level AI, but then it can self-replicate itself like 1,000 or 1,000,000 times over. And so then you have 1,000,000 genius level intellects working on something simultaneously, and it can actually line itself up so that it's all able to conjoin. So you reflect on that for a moment. You're like, oh my gosh! Then you can really solve a lot of.
It was like above average intelligence.
Yeah, he's like it doesn't even need to be like you don't need like one like super genius level AI. If you have even like a fairly intelligent AI that you can then replicate 1,000 or 1,000,000 times over, and because of the way it's wired, it can actually have those units all working in tandem in concert, so that they're speeding each other up or speeding up the entire process. And then it really dawns on you for a moment. You're like, oh, wait a minute, this thing really is going to transform a lot of what we think of as work. So this particular mathematician, there were a number of things that a lot of smart people said at this conference, but they were like, hey, right now the natural state of affairs is going to lead the rewards to end up being held in the hands of a small number of firms or individuals. And the level of public safeguards are kind of lacking. And so we should be pursuing some kind of Manhattan Project government-led initiative to try and keep AI from doing negative things as it's getting stronger and more powerful. And I heard this from a number of people there, and they were all correct. And then I thought to myself, oh gosh, like where is our government on this? And our government is not exactly, at the vanguard of trying to figure out what's happening in these labs or in these firms. So that reminded me of some of the large-scale issues that we're facing. Another person spoke about how there are a couple dozen countries that already are investing in AI weapon systems that are going to naturally want to make decisions as quickly as possible, because you have to consult a human. It slows you down. So one of the proposals is for countries to come together and adopt a treaty that says, hey, a human has to decide when to use lethal force. It's not just that an autonomous system goes, whoop, you're in the wrong place, like you dead, that sort of thing. But he said that the natural impulse for countries is going to be for speed and efficiency and not trying to have a human somewhere in that link.
Correct. Security guards, like guarding a border of some sort or a drone or something like that, where maybe it's got some humanity baked into its code, but it's going to shoot to kill when it sees a warm body or whatever it is, right? Is that kind of what we're talking about? And especially some of the countries that are bootstrapping that, they're just like, it kills anything that moves, right?
Yeah, and then you have asymmetrical non-country actors. So there's an international world order that right now is not exactly humming.
Right.
And, you have different factions, and then you have non-state actors, and whatever protocol you come up with. So right now the countries can't even agree on how to use AI militarily. And then if you have non-state actors or even terrorist organizations getting a hold of some of these things, then of course there are going to be no rules. So you start reflecting on what this is going to mean over time. You're like, oh my gosh. So those were some of the things that I took away. And I will say that this conference was very, very positive. There were people that were trying to solve these problems. They were like, look, let's come together and get in front of this stuff. And so I don't want to be super pessimistic in part because, it was a conference around solutions, but a lot of very smart people were very concerned about the natural trends.
Yeah, and we have been for a while. You ever read, I used to read this blog, Wait But Why?
Yeah.
By Tim Urban. And his one on Elon Musk a while ago was really good. But he did another one on AI. And basically the school of thought, at least then, and I think it's still the case, is that so there's like 3 forms of AI. Can do one task better than a human being. That's like when we play the computer in chess, or we play, someone GPS, I guess, giving you directions faster or something like that. One task though. Then it can do every task. It's as smart as a human being. And then we haven't gotten there yet. And the third one is it's smarter than a human being. And in his the school of thought is that we're at stage 1 right now. We know it's not an if, but it's a when we'll get to stage 2 when the computer is as smart as human being. But we don't know when that is, but we do know that once we hit 2, we'll essentially immediately hit 3.
Because as soon as it has the capacity to improve itself, then it can improve itself
to be smarter than us. Yeah.
And
then infinite. Yeah.
Yeah, exponentially so.
Yeah. And then the analogy he used in this blog post is that we will be like a monkey looking at a skyscraper. Like we'll know it's a skyscraper, or we'll know like it's a big object. We'll know it's got shapes and forms and maybe people going in and out and we can see activities, but we won't fundamentally understand what that skyscraper is, which is terrifying, I think, in AI in general. I don't know. It's like a next stage of human evolution, or evolution, I guess. It's not human anymore. Is there anything uplifting from the conference?
Yes, there was.
Okay.
All right, here's the uplifting part. So there was this professor who was using AI to help scientists in other disciplines find a cure for cancer. And one of the truths about science generally is that it's not terribly interdisciplinary, where if you have biology researchers, do they understand how to use the computational abilities of AI to go through gene sequencing, or if you're a chemist, drug compounds. And so they're just starting to be able to utilize some of these tools to their potential. It's very, very uplifting stuff around reducing brain aging because of eventually our brains decay. And for many people, it means Alzheimer's, which is freaking life destroyer and family destroyer. And so they think that they might be able to treat Alzheimer's using AI in part, cure cancer. So there was some uplifting research being done, really awesome, and some phenomenally talented people who were running that.
I'm sure.
There were also people with money there. So here was one of the dynamics is that if you were doing this high-end research, maybe you come because maybe someone there is just like, hey, I want to
write you a ticket.
I want to cut you a check.
Yeah.
Now, one of the sidebars, and I had Derek Thompson on the podcast a few weeks ago. He wrote an article in The Atlantic about the bottlenecks around scientific research, and now he's digging in and writing a book on the bottlenecks around scientific research. And so I talked to some of the scientists at this AI conference being like, hey, I was reading about how academics and scientists spend 25 to 40% of their time writing grant proposals, which, by the way, is a waste of time. If you're, a high-end scientist, like, you should just be actually doing research and whatnot. And he said, oh yeah, there are a bunch of problems associated with the funding of science, where if you're a scientist, you kind of know what the grantors are going to like, and most of the time it's going to be building upon past research that got a grant. And so you wind up with, one, it's super time consuming, and two, you're going to be pursuing avenues that people kind of are confident are fruitful. If you are someone who is going down a new road, and by the way, maybe, you don't have that much time, or you don't have like 10 prior grants and like, and this massive decades long career in academia, then you won't get a grant. And so there's not a lot of risk taking in science, but in these environments, sometimes this particular academic, for example, had received over $10 million in funding from like a tech philanthropist who recognized that this person was maybe going to help cure brain diseases, and was like, here's some money.
Right.
And so that there are some things going on like that are at the margins. One of the big questions is, could you actually get into the guts of, for example, the NIH grant process and make it better, speed it up in some way? There was another initiative called Fast Grants that one of the Stripe founders started just doling out mini grants to scientific projects, and just to see if there might be something promising that right now is getting overlooked. I instinctively love this stuff.
Yeah.
I talked to my brother, who's a professor, and said, hey, what percentage of the time do you spend writing grants? And he said,
half,
30 to 40. And so
if you've never written a grant, it's usually awful. It's like a questionnaire on a job application.
Oh, it's a million times worse than that. Like I talked
I think that's terrible.
I talked to my brother about. So here are my conversations with my brother as an example. I'll be like, hey man, what's up? And he'll be like, hey, can't talk, grant due 10 days from now. And I actually know exactly what that means, because the week to 2 weeks before the grant, he's pulling near all-nighters. He's trying to pull together all this research from different people and teams. Imagine something that's like thesis level, but it's not just yours. You have to bring in partners and co-authors, and then you submit this mega proposal to the NIH. And oh, by the way, people's careers depend upon what score they give it. So that there's like a freak out. So if my brother says to me, I have a grant proposal within 10 days, that means I will not talk to you until after this grant proposal is done. And then after the grant proposal's in, there is even like a recuperation day because of all of the grinding. Like if you look back to, when we were in college or whatnot, you remember, like finals period and like the,
then
like
you
that
die
kind of
for a
freak
day.
out. And
Yeah.
So imagine doing that as like an adult for decades. That's the process that right now we have built for our best researchers, by the way. These are people that are actually doing the best stuff. Because if you're not doing the best stuff, you're not going to get a grant to begin with. But we're going to put people who have already proven themselves through these crazy processes. Because and oh, by the way, and this is the other bottleneck my brother described to me, was that who evaluates this crazy grant proposal that he writes? It has to be peer reviewed. So there's like a limited number of world-class researchers who can evaluate the proposal to be able to say whether or not it makes sense.
Gonna work.
So this is a bottleneck because there aren't an unlimited number of these.
Interesting.
And so one of the things I said to him was like, why don't we just fucking pay the reviewers? And he's like, right now, reviewers don't get paid because it's a privilege and you're furthering science, and they don't want to taint it with commercial motivations.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's tainting it with commercial motivations? Like, I'm not going to give you a high score just because someone freaking, compensated me. At least I thought this was at least one bottleneck, because if you're a world-class scientist, you're trying to do your own research, and then when they hit you up to review someone else's grant proposal, it's not exactly the top of your priority list. I mean, you might do it because, you want to give back. But there's a ton of stuff in academia in particular that operates on these soft incentives where you're not getting paid. It's like, oh, this is a privilege. It's like, or it's the publisher perish thing. It's like, hey, if you are running these papers and you get this prestige and then, you get to keep your job or get tenure or whatever the thing is, like that there's this entire elaborate set of incentives. It's highly institutionalized. So if you imagine these innovative, cutting-edge scientific research projects, they're probably not going to be included in the conventional process much of the time.
So this is where my head went on this, is that we just had a conversation on Joe Biden and his administration, how they are not doing a good enough job like selling their work, if you will. And we're like, yeah, you do better job selling it. But here we are talking about professors, and they, I guess the equivalent of them selling their work is like trying to get more money and selling their work and their ideas to others. Like I guess my question to you is like, in most parts of, in any sort of, I'm going to call it entrepreneurship or building anything, there's a certain level of building and then selling what you're freaking building, right? And if you're an entrepreneur, if you're CEO, like how often are you fundraising? If you're a nonprofit, it's all the time. But if you're a CEO, it's probably 30 to 50% of your time, right? Probably similar range, maybe. Is it? Are you saying? I think you are, maybe, that for worlds like academia, where you have like that level of commitment and expertise and probably super brain, that we should get them off of that? Like they've devoted their life to just discovery. Like I don't know. Why should it be different than some of the other worlds you and I operate in?
Well, heck, man. I mean, as people who run nonprofits, when you're like always fundraising and whatnot,
we hated it.
Yeah. Or guess what? Also, like you're not doing the work during those times.
Yeah.
Like you're.
It's true.
Like I mean, I went to conferences all the time as the head of a nonprofit, just trying to be around people with grant writing capacities. It was a strange thing. It's like you'd go. The other thing is you had to be really discreet. Like you can't go around and be like, "Hey, give me money. Hey, give me money," or everyone would be like, "Oh, who the heck are you?" Instead, you're like, "Yeah." You're like, "Oh,
I love what you're building. Let me tell you my story.
Yeah, would love your guidance on how we can improve our, So there's like this kabuki. Now, for an academic, it turns out there is a marketplace for their research, and they're bound to it in various ways. So the main marketplace for their research is the NIH or whatever agency is funding the research. But most of the stuff, at least I've heard of in the fields that we're talking about, is through the NIH. And so if you get a grant from the NIH, then they pay for your research, and the school that you're associated with gets some of that grant money. So if you're at a level where you're getting millions of dollars in grants from the NIH, then any institution's like, ooh, like you pay for yourself. If you're an academic and your grants run dry, then if you're, for example, tenured, then you get to keep your job, but you have to teach classes for your salary. And then if you're teaching classes, you don't have time to do research. So this is the thing that all these academics are trying to avoid. They're trying to be like, oh, I have to get grants so I can do more research. And, oh, by the way, like not spend all my time teaching classes.
Right.
That's not what professors are digging for the most part. Now, I talked about this academic who's getting money from a tech philanthropist. Now, that's highly, highly unusual.
Yeah.
There's not much of a private or philanthropic market for academic research. Most of them are just beholden to the grant writing.
And I'm assuming that's because it's low ROI, right? If you're throwing $10 million at a curing cancer or XYZ research project, your odds are you're probably not going to find it, right, until years and years and years later, millions and more dollars. Is that why the market's low or small?
It's only that there are superstar academics who are doing research that is interesting enough where if you're a philanthropist, you're going to throw money at it.
Yeah. We used to, at UBS, there were some, but there was not a huge appetite for this kind of crazy risk research, if that makes sense. Like I would talk to professors decently often. They'd be like, oh, we've got a new way we think we can cure colon cancer. And I'm like, I don't know a single donor. It's like passionate about funding that, right? Like sometimes, but not a lot, So
this is something that I'm very interested in, is seeing if there's a better way to fund scientific advances so that we're seeing more breakthroughs, more medicines, more positive things.
Yeah.
Because through my family, I've seen the current system. Being an academic, it was kind of the family business. My dad was a professor. My grandfather was a professor.
Yeah.
My brother's a professor. I'm kind of the,
You're the black sheep for.
I'm the educational runt of the litter. Yeah. Like no PhD.
Lack of PhD. Yang.
There was a brief period when I was in college. I thought, like, should I try and be a professor? But I was like, it's not for me. Like,
Right.
and seeing my brother's career, as much as I admire and respect all the stuff he does, I also think like that it wouldn't have been a good fit for me.
Right. If you're a wealthy donor, right, you're worth $100 million. You're talking about people with $100 million on up, right? Because they can easily write your $5 to $10 million checks and move the needle for these places. The universities know who they are and find them because they have massive development teams. And their job is to literally scour the world for rich people and get these checks. So the universities are doing that job for the professors to get their cut, if that makes sense. You know,
but when the universities are scouring these donors,
they're getting big money instead of just specific project.
Yeah.
They're funding. They're getting their own kitty, right? And
totally.
They'll pitch it like, oh, we're curing colon cancer, we're curing X, we're doing all
Sometimes
this
they'll
research.
be like, hey, there's a professor, you want to fund their research, but for the most part, it's just going to the university.
Yeah. Let's do our awesomeness. And they get their handheld, they get invited to the party, it's all get their name on the building, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Different model. Anyway, I want to ask you this quickly before we shift to something a little more positive, although this is positive. But the world of automation, we never talked about this when you were running for president, was that, but you wrote about, and now we're seeing epic effects of this, and probably worse than we imagined, with mental health and the deterioration of mental health in the United States of America. I had this thought today, and I'm curious if you've seen this in your research or you had thoughts on it, is do you think the mental health deterioration and the problems with mental health in the United States are actually accelerating automation because human beings, if their mental health is declining, probably become more painful to employ or deal with, in the sense that...
Or maybe they're not, maybe they're quitting their jobs too.
Yeah, a number of reasons. And so imagine this will... we never talked about that as an accelerant of automation, but I imagine it would be.
Well, it's an accelerant of people having unfilled jobs, and then you're going to look around and say, okay, how do I man this retail kiosk or counter?
Right.
How do I make this restaurant more efficient or whatever it happens to be? Yeah, that's happening for sure. One of the things that a lot of us can sense right now is that there is a massive spike in people feeling anxious, depressed, lonely, out of touch, disconnected. I saw a documentary, Yang Gang documentary, actually. Thank you, Ching. My Yang Gang Diary.
You saw your own documentary? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Cool.
But it was based in 2019, and you realize just how positive times were relative to now. Like, you just see people walking around in 2019. I mean, it's like... there's a very, very sharp difference between 2021 and 2019.
Yeah.
And the pain is accelerating all sorts of terrible things. People are struggling very, very fundamentally. It's one reason why I'm so passionate about this child tax credit, because at a minimum, we can take the existential pressure off for millions of families. But yeah, the mental health crisis is worse than ever, in my opinion.
I miss these like little interactions at work.
Well, so this is something I said to Derek too, where and I have family members who are in this boat, where if you ask someone, it's like, hey, do you want to go back to the office? I'm like, hell no, I don't go back to the office.
Yeah.
But then if you watch them over 3 or 6 months, like working from home, they become depressed and miserable.
Yeah.
Now, so if you were to choose, I mean, no one wants friction. No one's going to be like, yes, sign me up for a commute. Sign me up for my annoying boss. Sign me up for annoying corporate behaviors.
For Larry in accounting who brings tuna fish in for lunch every day. No, thank you, right?
Yeah. But then it turns out that the absence of all of those interactions you're talking about, like, don't lead you to positive places necessarily. And that's playing out in like hundreds of thousands, probably millions of households around the country.
We are doing a lot of fun stuff. Normally on this podcast, we're talking about some of the stuff we're working on and you're working on. The only stuff we really talk about is forward party work, which is going great, and there's movement there. But we got more coming down the pipe, which is exciting.
I want to throw out there, too, humanityforward.com has been lobbying for the child tax credit. They're really doing great work, too. I am so proud of both Humanity Forward and the Forward Party. Like, Humanity Forward is the wholesome lobbyists for good stuff. We have some big announcements on that front soon. And then the Forward Party, super excited about this unifying political movement to try to create real choice and cure the dysfunction in our democracy. I had a very exciting meeting about that earlier today. So there is some great stuff going on both of those fronts.
Yeah, it's so we have more coming on the pike, which hopefully there's more optimism to come. Even but for starters, so imagine it's Thursday. You're listening to this the 16th. Hopefully, many of you are starting to go home for the holidays. Maybe this weekend. Maybe you work from home a little bit with the family. So we got a lot of good positive feedback on content recommendations last time. So, Andrew, what are you watching over the break?
I mentioned it last time, but I'm going to miss Succession. I just saw the season finale. So
I haven't watched it yet. That's on my list, yeah.
So if people haven't watched Succession, that's some quality TV.
I heard it's good. I heard it's really good.
I can talk about some of the stuff I have not seen, which is kind of hazardous. I was a huge Matrix fan.
Ooh, yeah.
And I think this Matrix Resurrections movie is going to be good. It's coming out Christmas Eve. There's that Don't Look Up movie on Netflix that you said looks hysterical by Adam McKay, who did The Big Short.
With Leo and Jennifer Lawrence.
And Jennifer Lawrence, which looks really good.
That's pretty good.
And that's going to be on Netflix. And
I love The Big Short. He's a good director.
Yes. I'm going to do something a little bit mixed, and so that this might not be useful. I read this fantasy book series called The Wheel of Time years and years ago when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And they just came out with a maybe $200 million version of it on Amazon Prime. Have you watched this?
I have not watched it. It's on my list. It's not the top of the list, though. Should I put it on the top of the list, or this is your plan to watch?
Well, so I watched a few episodes, and this is not a wholehearted recommend.
Okay.
This is like you watch it, and it kind of it gave me mixed feelings as someone who kind of knew the characters in the book.
Okay.
But there is like a Xena warrior princess vibe to it, plus just lots of blood. and it's like it's just going along, and then every once in a while something kind of gnarly happens. You're like, what?
Okay.
And then it reminded me too. So I was watching this series, and I was reminded of the books, and then I looked up the author of the books, and he was a military veteran, and it gave me those kinds of vibes where it's like the books seemed very compelling when I was a kid because there was like a grittiness and realism to them. So my caveat on the series is like it's not giving me like escapist good times.
You're not getting
circa 2021. It's like it's kind of making me feel like
it's a little depressing and raw.
Yeah, it's a little bit like
Okay.
like the kind of grittiness. It's like it's not necessarily what I'm looking for.
It's my girlfriend. She doesn't like most of the stuff I want to watch. Not that she doesn't like the shows. It's just that she wants to watch something happier.
Yeah, it's funny because like Succession, I mean, it's gritty in the sense that it feels true to human nature. But Emma and I have been enjoying the heck out of that.
And there's humor there, at least.
Yes, I saw A Quiet Place 2 on streaming the other day, and that was a tight watch. It was like only maybe an hour and 37 minutes, and I was surprised by how crisp and enjoyable it was. It was a very, very succinct,
I love
compact movie.
So here's all I'll add. I watched King Richard the other night. You had recommended that. That's an uplifting movie. Very well done. I didn't realize that the Williams sisters produced that, which is even cooler. I'm a big Will Smith fan. What I'm excited to watch, I got three things excited to watch. I'm excited to watch, and you guys can hold me accountable if it's bad or good. Foundation on Apple TV. If you have that
Another
one.
expensive sci-fi series. I've not seen
another one. Sounds similar. Not similar to Wheel of Time, but it's about... frankly, like restarting human civilization. But I think it's a little more uplifting than what that sounds like. Apparently, the Sandra Bullock movie called The Unforgivable, it just came out on Netflix, is very good. Probably watch that. The new Spider-Man movie's out, but I think you have to watch it in theaters or it comes out over the holidays. But that relationship is adorable.
One other
Zendaya.
One other series that Evelyn and I have been watching and enjoying a lot is a show called Genius that's now on Hulu. The first season is about Albert Einstein, and I did not know most of this stuff about Einstein's life. It was based on the Walter Isaacson biography, and you're like, wow, this is what was going on with Einstein like at the time, and so that's been a really good watch. It's done by, I think, either National Geographic or the BBC. It's kind of got that Euro vibe, like, kind of dignified.
Okay, like I'm learning something.
Jeffrey Rush plays Einstein at a certain time. So the talent level is very high. Emily Watson's in it. That gives you a sense of it.
Emma Watson?
No, Emily Watson, who's like kind of the older, dignified British actress.
Okay.
So there are some dignified Brits. And so
they're pretty good at acting.
It feels classy. I learned something. There's a lot of history and context. Genius. And they switch subjects every season. So season 1's Einstein.
Got it. And there's a different one every time.
Yep.
Here's what I will say. If you're going to binge a podcast that is not Forward, obviously, my brother got me down this rabbit hole, and it was worth it. There's a podcast called The Murdoch Murders. It's M-U-R-D-A, I think it's A-U-G-H. It's about a family in South Carolina that basically has run this county in South Carolina for like 100 years. And there's like 4 random murders that happen that you would never think are connected. There's like a DUI on a boat, and then there's a double homicide, and then there's a housekeeper, like caretaker, that fell down the stairs, and there's another like attempted suicide, and there's a guy who gets hit in a hit and run. And they're all different people, and they're all connected to the same freaking dude. And the way it's done, like, she's a reporter, she's reporting on it in real time. It is fascinating. It's basically the trial of Alec Murdoch, or the case against Alec Murdoch, and it's wild. And it catches you up to the present because it's still going. So I'm a little pissed that I can't keep binging, but it's very good. I will say,
addictive. There's that.
Her, and she talks about this. Her voice is not like soothing, I'd say. I don't want, like, people voice their voice, but I will say, like, don't come at me and be like, I didn't like her voice. Like that, she addresses that in the second episode. But I think she's super talented and does a really good job diving in. And it's got everything you want into like a case like that, a true crime case. So, binge that past couple days, if you will.
We'll be back next week with some more Happy Holidays recommendations. I was someone who was like, look, let's try and put some escapism, joy, charm. I am feeling great right now, but it's a very, very tough time, and I've had my ups and downs this past period. So hopefully you end this year on an up note. Get ready to hug your loved ones, get home for the holidays, and hopefully really enjoy ourselves.
Amen, man. Life is about people and relationships. So tell someone you love them, give them a hug. I'll give you a hug, maybe. I'll give you a high five. I've been staring at you too long, man. So,
fist pound.
We did it. Another episode of Forward. Happy holidays, guys. See you next week.